Stephanie White is obsessed building up Stephanie White. Stephanie White, in case you aren't aware, Steph, there's going to be over 100 free agents this offseason. You got 2 expansion teams coming in. You have a college draft in about a month. You have training camp knocking at your front door. You have decisions to make within your roster. Do you pay Kelsey Mitchell? Do you not pay Kelsey?
March 23rd, 2025. Training camp starts April 19th. That's less than 4 weeks away. The Indiana Fever have over 100 free agents to evaluate across the league. 2 expansion teams about to poach their roster. A college draft happening in days. And critical decisions about whether to pay Kelsey Mitchell or let her walk. Their head coach has exactly 26 days to prepare for the most compressed, chaotic offseason in WNBA history. So what is Stephanie White doing with this precious time? She's calling college basketball games for ESPN.
I'm going to call tournament games instead. I'm going to focus on preparing the best talking points I have for South Carolina and Tomato Can University. Great. I'm going to focus on having the best talking points I possibly can for Tomato Can University going up against Broccoli U. Great. Folks, imagine Bill Belichick spending his offseason not worrying about building the best possible team. Imagine Phil Jackson spending his offseason not focusing on building the best possible team around Jordan Round.
This isn't a one-time appearance. White committed to calling first and second round NCAA tournament games in Columbia, South Carolina. Number 1 seed South Carolina versus number 16 seed Southern. Number 9 USC versus number 8 Clemson. She's prepping talking points for teams that have zero chance of producing WNBA talent instead of scouting the actual players who could fill the gaps in Indiana's roster. And here's what makes this particularly problematic. The Fever's last offseason already exposed their scouting weaknesses. They brought in Damiris Dantas and relegated her to the bench. They ignored overseas talent while Golden State brought in multiple international players who contributed immediately. Indiana's roster construction has been questionable at best, and now their head coach is spending the most critical preparation period doing television commentary.
During the offseason, White joined Team USA as an assistant coach for the 2026 FIBA World Cup qualifying tournament, handcuffing Caitlin Clark, playing her at the 4, playing her at the 3, misusing her, as she does frequently. The former WNBA Coach of the Year, that makes me laugh, sorry. The former WNBA Coach of the Year helped the United States secure a 5-0 record in Puerto Rico. Yes, she definitely helped. But the results didn't really matter for the Americans. The U.S. had qualified last year for the 2026 FIBA World Cup in September. White has also worked as a college basketball analyst with ESPN since 2007. She recently called her first NBA game as a color commentator, working a January contest between the Raptors and the Magic. Most of her time with ESPN has been spent calling men's and women's college basketball games, including NCAA tournament games.
White has worked as a college basketball analyst with ESPN since 2007. She recently called her first NBA game in January, working a Raptors Magic contest. Most of her ESPN work focuses on men's and women's college basketball, including NCAA tournament coverage. And look, nobody's saying she can't have outside interests. But timing matters. Context matters. The 2024 WNBA Coach of the Year award sitting on her shelf doesn't change the reality that her team got eliminated in the conference semifinals after blowing a playoff game in overtime. Caitlin Clark, Aaliyah Boston, and Lexi Hull were all dealing with injuries during that Vegas series. The roster depth wasn't there, the preparation wasn't there, and instead of obsessing over how to fix those problems, White is back in the broadcast booth.
Number 1 seed South Carolina versus number 16 seed Southern. Number 16 seed Southern. That's the team that you're wasting precious prep time for to focus on Southern. Number 9 seed USC versus number 8 seed Clemson. This is disgusting. This is disgusting. Stephanie White would much rather call games on ESPN than be focused on.
Let's talk about what's actually happening in the next 46 days. The expansion draft is April 6th. Toronto and Portland are building entire rosters from scratch, and they're selecting from Indiana's unprotected players. Free agency negotiations begin April 9th, with players able to sign deals starting April 12th. The college draft happens right in the middle of all this chaos. Then training camp opens April 19th, preseason games start April 25th, and the regular season tips off May 8th. Commissioner Kathy Engelbert told reporters the delayed CBA agreement won't affect any of these dates. Everything is happening on schedule, compressed into a month and a half of absolute madness. Every single WNBA head coach is facing this same timeline, but not every coach is taking side gigs during the preparation window.
I would argue was detrimental to the success of the team. You see the Fever. You saw them last offseason. They got Michaela Timpson. They relegated her to the bench. They didn't go overseas. Instead, you see the Golden State Valkyrie go overseas and bring in tons of talent. Indiana Fever don't do that, and we are where we are.
Here's the question nobody at ESPN is asking. What are Becky Hammon and Sandy Brondello and Cheryl Reeve doing right now? They're not calling college basketball games. They're watching film. They're on calls with agents. They're evaluating international players. They're running salary cap scenarios. They're obsessed with the process of building championship rosters. Bill Belichick didn't spend his off-seasons doing television commentary. Phil Jackson wasn't moonlighting as a broadcaster while trying to build dynasties around Michael Jordan and Kobe Bryant. Nick Saban didn't take March off to call college football games. The greatest coaches in sports history share one common trait. They're completely consumed by the work of winning. They don't do side quests.
Sixth, you have free agency. Free agency is set to begin the day after the expansion draft, according to the schedule the league presented to teams. From April 7th and 8th, teams can make qualifying offers to restricted or reserved or core eligible players. Negotiations officially begin April 9th, and players can formally sign deals on April 12th. You have the college draft. Then you have training camp, starting off April 19th.
And let's address the elephant in the room. Stephanie White's offensive system. The Fever ran one of the most stagnant half-court offenses in the league last season. Caitlin Clark spent possessions standing in the corner while Indiana ran predictable sets that defenses could read 3 passes ahead. They misused the best playmaker in women's basketball by treating her like a spot-up shooter. White's coaching decisions during the playoff series against Vegas were questionable at best. The rotations didn't maximize their talent. The adjustments came too slowly, and when the series went to a deciding Game 5, Indiana didn't have the depth or preparation to close it out. That's not just bad luck. That's a coaching and roster construction problem that requires obsessive attention to fix. So you have to ask yourself, is Stephanie White hands-off when it comes to roster building? Is she leaving everything to Kelly Kroskoff and Amber Cox while she focuses on her media career? Because if she's not in the film room right now, if she's not on calls with overseas scouts, if she's not grinding through hours of college game footage to identify draft prospects, then who exactly is building this team? The Fever have 2 future Supermax contracts coming for Caitlin Clark and Aaliyah Boston. They need to decide whether Kelsey Mitchell gets paid or walks. They need to figure out how to backfill if Lexi Hull and Sophie Cunningham leave in free agency. They need to protect the right players from the expansion draft. These aren't decisions you make casually in a couple of phone calls. This is the work that separates championship organizations from perpetual underachievers. Think about what White is actually doing by calling these games. She's prepping for 4 teams: South Carolina, Southern, USC, and Clemson. That means she's watching film on those 4 rosters, studying their tendencies, preparing analysis for a television audience. That's time and mental energy that could be spent evaluating the dozens of college players actually entering the WNBA draft. It's time that could be spent watching overseas leagues to identify hidden gems. It's time that could be spent with her coaching staff, breaking down what went wrong against Vegas and how to fix it. Instead, she's crafting the perfect soundbite about a 16 seed that's going to get destroyed by 40 points. And here's what really gets me. White joined Team USA as an assistant coach for the 2026 FIBA World Cup qualifying tournament in Puerto Rico. The United States went 5-0, which is exactly what you'd expect when you put the best players in the world on the same court. Did Stephanie White's coaching make a difference in those games? Sure, maybe marginally. But let's be honest about what that experience was. Another side quest. Another commitment pulling her attention away from the primary job of building a championship contender in Indiana. And the most frustrating part? She was coaching Caitlin Clark during that tournament. Playing her at the 4, playing her at the 3. misusing her in international competition the same way she misuses her during the WNBA season. The pattern here is undeniable. Stephanie White is more committed to maintaining her media presence than she is to the obsessive preparation required for greatness. She's more interested in being Stephanie White the broadcaster, Stephanie White the Team USA assistant, Stephanie White the ESPN analyst, than she is in being the coach who outworks everyone else in the league. And you know what? That's a choice. It's a perfectly valid career choice. But it's not the choice that championship coaches make. It's not the choice that separates good from great. It's the choice that leads to first-round playoff exits and wasted potential. Compare Indiana's offseason approach to what Golden State did. The Valkyries went overseas. They identified international talent that other teams overlooked. They built depth through superior scouting and player evaluation. They didn't just rely on the draft and free agency. They did the work that most teams won't do because it's hard and time-consuming and requires obsessive attention to detail. That's what separates organizations that sustain success from organizations that get lucky for a season and then fade. And right now, with Stephanie White calling college basketball games instead of doing that work, Indiana looks a lot more like the latter than the former. The Fever have the best young core in the WNBA. Caitlin Clark is a generational talent. Aaliyah Boston is a defensive anchor and future perennial all-star. They have pieces that most teams would sacrifice anything to acquire, but talent alone doesn't win championships. Preparation wins championships. Obsessive attention to detail wins championships. Roster construction and depth and having the right players in the right roles wins championships. And you don't build that by spending your offseason doing television commentary while other coaches are grinding in the film room. Imagine if this were the NFL. Imagine if Andy Reid spent February and March calling college football games instead of preparing for the draft and free agency. Imagine if Sean McVay took a month off to do television analysis, while other coaches were installing new systems and evaluating talent. It would be considered professional malpractice. The media would crucify them. Fans would be calling for their jobs. But in the WNBA, Stephanie White gets a pass because she won Coach of the Year. Never mind that the award was largely based on Caitlin Clark's impact, not revolutionary coaching decisions. Never mind that Indiana's offense was stagnant and their playoff performance was disappointing. She gets the award, and suddenly she's untouchable. Here's the reality. The next month will determine Indiana's championship window. The decisions made between now and May 8th will shape whether this team maximizes Caitlin Clark's prime or wastes it. Whether they build sustainable depth or remain one injury away from collapse. Whether they become a dynasty or a cautionary tale about squandered potential. And their head coach is spending this critical period calling games between teams that don't matter, preparing analysis for matchups that have zero bearing on the Fever's future. So what's the message this sends to the organization? What's the message it sends to Caitlin Clark and Aaliyah Boston and the rest of the roster? That coaching the Indiana Fever is just one part of Stephanie White's portfolio? That it's not the singular obsession that drives every waking moment? Because if that's the message, then don't be surprised when this team falls short of expectations again. Don't be surprised when the roster construction is mediocre and the depth isn't there and the playoff run ends earlier than it should. Championship coaches don't have side gigs during the most important preparation period of the year. They're too busy being obsessed with the process. The question Indiana fans need to ask is simple. Do you want a coach who's committed to greatness, or do you want a coach who's committed to building the Stephanie White brand? Because right now, based on how she's spending her time, the answer seems pretty clear. And if the Fever settle for that, if they're okay with their head coach prioritizing ESPN appearances over roster preparation, then they deserve exactly what they're going to get. A talented team that never quite reaches its potential because the person leading them wasn't willing to do the obsessive work required to get there. So Stephanie, if you're listening, the great ones are obsessed with the process. Belichick was obsessed. Brady was obsessed. Jackson was obsessed. Jordan was obsessed. Kobe was obsessed. Caitlin Clark is obsessed. And if you want to be mentioned in the same conversation as the legendary coaches in this league, you need to be obsessed too. Not with calling college basketball games, not with building your media resume, but with the singular focus of building a championship roster in the 26 days you have left before training camp. Because right now, while you're in Columbia preparing to call South Carolina versus Southern, Becky Hammon is watching film, and that's why the Aces are champions and the Fever are not.